Over a span of 2,000 years, 40 authors on 3 different continents and in 3 different languages penned 66 books, all of which were supernaturally inspired and intricately designed as God's revelation to man. The spoken word of God, living and active, sharper than a 2-edged sword, recorded and bound just for us. Join us on a journey from Genesis to Revelation, all 66 books, the big book, cover to cover. This is Michael Easley, inContext.
It is my delight, thrill, excitement, joy to have my friend Jeanne Hendricks back on the podcast. How are you doing, Jeanne?
I am doing very well. The Lord is good to me, far beyond what I deserve, but I'm so honored to be with you.
Well, and as you tell me one-on-one, it's that stubborn German constitution of yours, right?
Well, I guess so. It's a combination. And having lived all those years with Howard Hendricks, what else do you do?
There is that. Well, listen, you have taught the Book of Ruth probably countless times, and I know you're a learner, and I know you've taught this book a lot of times, and I think the kinsman redeemer is the hero, and I think Ruth is the compliant, faithful follower, but you've got a different take on the book.
Well, it's very contemporary. It's interesting. This book was written, more than 3,000 years ago, and it is so up to date. I mean, the people in it are going through exactly the same things that we see today, especially with women. It's very relevant, and the dependency is so often on men, but then we do the men and we're left alone. And this whole thing is just full of raw emotion, and it just gets to you when you read it every time.
Let me set a little bit of our context, because the book of Judges, which covers about 350 to 410 years, that book covers the darkest chapters of Israel's life. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There's no king in Israel. And then Ruth is this story. Now, it came about in the days when it's when the judges were judging. So we get this little 2-page story in our Bible that somewhere fall into that 350-plus year dark chapter of Israel's history of 3 key players, Ruth, Naomi, and the kinsman redeemer, Boaz. So it's a dark, dark chapter, but there's a bright story.
Well, it is. It's very bright, but it really does start out very, very dark. It teaches the force of it is that it teaches you what to do when the world falls apart. It's the secret of renewal, revival. It's a power story. I think of it as kind of a password into the power source. How do you get beyond when everything falls apart? And it sort of falls to me in 4 different scenes, if you will, that I use my husband's alliteration so that I can remember it, of despair, desperation, decision, and then deliverance. And you got to walk through those first ones, and it just seems impossible that it could be as bad as it was.
So let's start with despair. Give us, fill us in.
Okay, they're in this little family, and of course, remember, this is a Hebrew family. They're living in this little town of Bethlehem, which later will become very famous as the birthplace of Jesus. But it's an agrarian society. So you have you're dependent upon your crops, and when you have a famine, when you have a drought, you don't eat. And this Hebrew family, and all the names have meanings, like Elimelech means God is king. His wife Naomi means pleasant, and they have these 2 young sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and their names mean weak and pining.
It's kind of comical, isn't it? You name your children. You wonder what they were like as infants, right?
That's right. It was a sad situation. Yeah. And Elimelech we don't know what his attitude was, but he was absolutely despairing of how he's going to feed the family, what he's going to do, and he figures out. It's kind of like the Okies in the 20s in the United States when we had a drought and the sandstorms and all the rest, and they all went out to California because they just couldn't make it in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But anyway, he goes. But remember, because the Bible doesn't tell us exactly how it all happened, and the historians are not quite sure of which direction they went. But we have to remember that Bethlehem was located on this road. It's called the Grand Trunk Road. Now they had two options. They could go north around the north end of the Dead Sea because he wanted to go to Moab. He heard that in the highlands there it was very healthy living. Kind of like my friend who went out because she had health problems, and she goes out to the desert where the air was drier.
Well, and this is true in biblical history too, because from Abraham's time onward, famines hit. Right. You had to go where rain and crops were.
That's right.
So they're going to Moab, correct?
So they have to go to Moab, and between Bethlehem and Moab, there's this thing called the Dead Sea, and the historians aren't quite sure. They could go north, go around the north end where they have to ford the Jordan River, or they could go south around the south end and up into the hills of Moab, but anyway, either way they went, it was a very long, plus more than 50, 60 miles, a very treacherous journey. And so they piled everything together and probably had an ox cart and maybe a donkey or two, and off they went. But it was a hard trip. And the father dies. We do not know how he died. I wonder in my own mind whether they had such a tough trip that it took his health or whatever happened. At any rate, they lost Elimelech. And Naomi is left with two sons. Now they grow, and both of them marry local gals out of this alien culture. Their names were Orpah and Ruth. Now, we have to look at it from their standpoint because they moved into a home that was totally different from where they had grown up. There was no polygamy. There was a husband and wife love and devotion to each other. They followed the Mosaic Law, no doubt.
But they marry Moabites.
Yes. So it was not against the law to marry a Moabite. According to Deuteronomy, they were allowed to marry, but it was a very strange situation.
Right. It wasn't, the pure intent was to marry within the tribes and not to intermarry outside.
That's
so
right.
We're going to make jump ahead, and based on Ruth's comments, it seemed, we would say the language, she came to Christ, but it seems as though she had faith in Yahweh Elohim, right?
Where she developed that, and
right.
That's the big question. How did they change? How did she change? Well, we know that although we don't have the details, both of the sons eventually died. And here is this situation with Naomi and these two daughters-in-law. And the raw emotion of this thing is, as you can picture them clinging together. And dear Naomi has got to make a critical decision, and that's the turning point, really, of the whole story.
I think of, and you talk about Oklahoma and the Dust Bowl. I think of when we see refugees. We see Rwandan refugees that have lost maybe both parents, and they're huddled together with a grandma and 2 or 3 children, and they've got nothing.
Right.
And that's where we are, right?
They're absolutely desperate. They have nothing. They're everything's gone, and it's time that Naomi has to make a decision, and this is the turning point. And she's a woman of, I think, common sense. She says, go back, live with your families. You're young, you can remarry, you have children, but I have to leave.
So let me interrupt for just a second. Let's just for my own benefit. we're talking about a desperate situation in the book of Judges. And you start out, number 1D, despair. And that's the despair of having to, go and travel to Moab, through the Dead Sea, the complication there. Now the desperation. We've lost Elimelech. We've lost Mahlon, Chilion. We have an older woman with 2 daughters-in-law who are widows. And now we got a decision to make.
It's a very, very critical decision. And by now, Naomi is worn down to a nub, I'm sure.
Sure.
And so she does what I think of as the next best thing to do. Tell the girls to go home. I've got to go back. Someone has said she was like a wounded animal that makes its way to the birthplace in the woods. There was nothing else to do but to go home. So she makes this decision and tells the girls to go back. They, of course, they like her. They depend upon her. She's a light in their life. But Orpah decides, I got to do that. I got to go back. So she does. But then we're surprised by this amazing statement that Ruth makes, which is essentially saying, don't ask me to leave you, because I'm going to go wherever you go. I'm going to live with you wherever you live. Your God. And this is the key right here. She has seen something beyond anything she ever knew. There's a God in the life of these people, this Jehovah God. Your God was going to be, he's my God. She has come to a place of belief. She says, where you die, I'm going to die there, and I'm going to be buried wherever you're buried. I am one of you. One of your family. It's a beautiful statement, of course, which has gone down through the ages and repeated over and over. This wonderful sense of belonging to this family. We do not know what Naomi taught, but I'm reminded of the verse in Deuteronomy 33, the eternal God is thy refuge, underneath are the everlasting arms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that's the basis on which they return, these 2 women going back to Bethlehem. So the decision is made, and then we begin the deliverance, which is so beautiful, because when they get there, of course, according to the culture, the women are looking at Naomi, and they're saying, is this Naomi? She must have aged amazing.
Right, all right.
And we're thinking probably Elimelech leased his property, and she's coming back to her hometown of Bethlehem. It's barley season. It would be April, and then it was followed by the wheat season in May. And so it's a situation where Ruth can have a way to earn a living, because in the old Mosaic custom, the reapers were told as they took the barley out of the field that they were to leave some along the sides for the poor people. And so Ruth is there as a very humble person. She shows extreme humility and virtue, because it was customary for those poor people often to flirt with the reapers, but she's a woman of great virtue, and she follows along and picks up the grain and tells her mother-in-law what she's doing. And Naomi gives her, of course, the advice that she needs, that she should stay in this field. When she tells her mother-in-law, I have been gleaning, as they would call it, in the field of this man named Boaz, the light goes on, apparently, in Naomi's mind, and she says, Boaz is a relative. Now, he probably, what we know from the end when he goes to the city council to make his statement, he was probably not a brother of Elimelech, but maybe like a cousin or
relative,
someone like
right.
that. And she says, stay there with that man, because he is reliable.
Can I inject and get your opinion on something?
Yeah.
Because the plan, which is hatched, so to speak, it's very risky what Naomi's up to.
Oh, yes.
But what we find in chapter 2, I love this sentence. Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Please let me go to the field and glean." And what insight that gives us into the character. You mentioned this, but I wanted to just elaborate a bit. What a remarkable woman she is to leave her home country to go to a place she's never been with her mother-in-law because of the rumor of this Yahweh Elohim who's provided bread. And now she's got the moxie, if you will, to say, "Let me go do what I can do."
Mm-hmm. Her humility really showed,
right,
as well as her decency and her love for her mother-in-law. It's her character comes through at this point. And, of course, Boaz notices this, and he takes a liking to her. And then her mother-in-law explains to her the customs that would make him notice her more, and explains and gives her directions as to how to attract his attention. Remember, Naomi is an older woman, and she is looking for a husband for this woman that she brought. And suddenly it seems to me the light goes on. This is a possibility here. And so,
hey, he's a doctor. He's a lawyer. He's an eligible bachelor.
That's right. And he's wealthy as well. So it looks good, and of course it works out. And Boaz then is faced with a problem, because according to the law that they lived by, he had to go and make an announcement to the city council, a public announcement that he wished to purchase this property. And of course the law was that he could that a man could purchase the property of his relative, and any eligible bride would come with it, because the thing was that they had to have children. The family had to go on.
Well, the Levitical Law, if your brother died and left his wife without children, had a provision that you were to bring her in and father children so that the name of the brother was not forgotten, right?
Right.
So that's a little backdrop. And then, again, this transaction, which is really quite interesting, the landowner or closer relative is not named.
No.
Isn't that interesting that God doesn't want us to... It's not about what he failed to do, but about what Ruth and Boaz and Naomi did by faith. I think that's a remarkable part of the story.
It is. But Ruth, of course, is so aware of her position, where she even says she fell on her face. It tells us in chapter 2. She says, why have I found favor in your eyes that you should take notice of me? I am a foreigner. She was an alien person, and she didn't feel worthy of this, which I think is a tremendous picture of us spiritually as we come to the Lord. I'm not worthy of what you did for me.
Indeed.
You died for me,
Indeed.
but I'm not worthy of this. But, of course, his love is overshadowing the whole thing. And when the closer relative, it could have been a brother, but he did not have the desire or the ability to take over this situation. And so Boaz, who was possibly a cousin or someone, he stepped in and bought the property, and the bride came with it. It is such an amazing picture, a parable, if you will, of what the Lord does for us. We are aliens. We have no right to have any part in what God provides, but he says, I've loved you, and I've bought you, and I've paid for you, so you are mine now. It's this ignominious beginning comes to this wonderful restitution and rest. But the lesson that I personally glean from this is all this amazing story, which has such a spiritual background and import to it, is in this world, in the 21st century, I'm a woman. Am I a woman that would inspire others to trust the God that I trust in? And Naomi, of course, is just trying to live a life, but she had in her a light that was shining, and she didn't even know it, or wasn't even aware of how much it was affecting other people. And that's the incredible story, the lesson that drops into everybody's mind as they think about this in today's world.
Now, just to review, you've talked about these 4 Ds: the despair, the desperation, the decision, and the deliverance.
Right.
And one thing you have written, that there's no Ruth without a Naomi.
That's right. And that's why that question is so central in my own mind, because although we all love Ruth, and she was certainly a wonderful role model, as I feel that we could not have been a Ruth if there hadn't been this mother-in-law, this Naomi person, who in her own way just worshiped the Lord and let the light shine when she didn't even realize it. It's a wonderful example for every woman, every Christian woman today.
I also love that toward the end, of course, we know the story too well sometimes, but Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap.
That's right. And
what a great picture.
That's the beautiful finish to the story. Yep. That not only did Boaz fall in love and marry Ruth, but they had this son named Obed, and for Naomi it was a closure. It was that ability, as you say, to hold this little baby. And there's nothing quite like holding a little grandchild.
And then the neighbor women say, and again, these are tribal neighbors, word spread like fire. A son has been born to Naomi.
That's right.
This was a big deal. And
it was a big deal.
You can see this woman with a giant smile holding her little baby grandson in her lap, rocking. And by the way, she's called Naomi, not Mara.
That's right. We skipped over the way that they responded or the way Naomi responded when she came back, because she was at the bottom, and she said, "Don't even call me by my name, Naomi, because that means pleasant, and God has dealt bitterly with me." She experienced what so many women today experience. She's just been had. She's at the bottom. She has nothing left. I read about these dear women, the refugee women, whose husbands and families have been taken away from them, and they've been persecuted, and they have nothing at all. And this is where Naomi was. She says, God has just dealt bitterly with me. But God, as you say, He is the kinsman redeemer, and He makes all things new.
So again, you started this way, but just to refresh all of our minds, we're in a culture today where women's roles are pushed and pulled, and strong opinions about feminism and stay at home and don't work and you must have a career, and there's so many things broiling for young women today. And it can be hard. It can be overwhelming to navigate. So talk to some of those women as you think through this story and Jeanne Hendricks' story of how things have changed, but God hadn't changed. And we're going to have times of trouble and despair and desperation, and we're going to have to make decisions.
Well, one of the things that happen to you as you get older, and I could now speak about that, is that you have experienced a lot of loss in your life. You can't live in this world without experiencing loss. And I could go down and enumerate my own personal losses of many family members whom I loved, and as well as dreams that never came true. And now you're older, and we like to say wiser, but not always. And many women come to the end of life and they've lost everything. They've lost their health. They've lost their family. They've lost all means of support. And we can become very, very bitter. And this is His message to us that I'm still here. Look at me. I have done something for you. I loved you no matter where you have been, what has happened to you. I still love you, and I have paid for you, and I want you to come and be in my family. That belonging is so important. I've been very blessed in my life because my earliest memory was my father saying to me, "You're my little girl." And when he would say that, I didn't realize it at the time, but I know now he's saying, "You belong to me." We all have to belong to someone who is bigger and wiser and more capable than we are. And God is saying that message to us through this story of Ruth. The story is not just dropped there in the Bible because it's an interesting story. It's a little love story. It's far more than that. It is the story of what God does. We call him the kinsman redeemer because he made us, he owns us, and he loves us, and he paid for us. And we can trust him and trust our lives to him, not only for this world, but for the next. Just yesterday, I heard a woman being interviewed. She was 100 years old, and they asked her, "What has kept you going so long?" And she said, "Well, when you fall down, you just have to get up again." And I thought to myself, that sounds so wonderful. What happens when you can't get up again? What else is there to look for? What is there to hold on to? It is something unseen. It is the unseen love of the Heavenly Father who is the final answer to all of our problems. And that's why the Bible has been written. That's why this story is here, so that we can know what kind of a God we have. He's always there for us. And the world we live in is so harsh, and women often bear the brunt of that harshness. And God is saying, "I'm there for you no matter what."
Okay, let me ask you a final kind of wrap up on this.
Yeah.
You are sitting having coffee with a young wife at La Madeleine's somewhere in the Dallas area, and she is gone through a horrible divorce. She's in trouble financially. Maybe she's a single mom now. She's got a couple of kids, and she's poured her heart out to you and said, "Jeanne, what do I do?" Where do you start with her? What do you tell her?
Well, first of all, I hear her story. I want to know all about her. I want to hear that heartache that she is describing. And then I want to tell her that there is a God in heaven who loves her. She's not forsaken. I want to give her some encouragement from the Scriptures, because there are all these promises that God gives us. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. But we have to place our trust in this Lord who offers his life to us. But that's on the unseen level. Now, on the day-to-day level, she needs to make some contact. She needs to. I could offer her the opportunity to go to my church, where they have groups that meet with who discuss problems just like hers, and there are people there who will love her, will help her, and to make these human kind of contacts that she needs. But it's to make it very clear to her that it's not just these human contacts. It is the contact with the Lord in heaven and what he has done to save her, and that she may have come to this day for such a time as this, so that he has given her the word of his love. I will possibly, and very often would, give her something to read, something to do, some person to see, so that she's not left alone. You don't just toss her off and say, "Well, good luck," because that would not be not only the proper thing to do, but that's not what the love of God says to us, that we are to love each other, we're to love our enemies, we're to treat others as we would like to be treated ourselves.
Jeanne, it's always a delight to talk to you. I look forward to our phone calls, and when we're in Dallas, to come by and hug your neck. And Cindy and I...
come to Dallas again.
Well, Cindy and I love you so much, and your imprint is on our marriage, on our lives. Hopefully we transferred some of it to our kiddos, and now we've got grandkids to try to love. And
yes.
You and the Prof are in our Hall of Faith, and we love you, and thank you for your time. And we'll get you back on the broadcast soon.
Well, I am the most blessed woman in the world and so honored to just chat with you today. Thanks so much.
Michael Easley in Context is fully funded from donations by our listeners. If you're a regular listener, would you consider giving a one-time or perhaps monthly donation on our website? You can find us on michaelincontext.com. In Context is engineered by Chad Cates, produced by Hannah Seymour, and music composed by Tycho, Chad Cates, and Blair Masters.